Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Today, the waves rise high, and the ground beneath us begins to tremble. We are diving into the complete depths of the Earthshaker, Poseidon. Close your eyes, let your shoulders fall, let your jaw unclench, and let the steady, rhythmic sound of your own breath mimic the rising and falling of the tide. Imagine, if you will, the smell of salt in the air, sharp, clean, and ancient. Imagine the deep, resonant sound of water crashing against stone, a sound that has existed since the very beginning of the world. Today, we are going to dive deep, deeper than the sun's rays can penetrate, down into the crushing, beautiful, and terrifying blue. We are going to speak of the Earthshaker, the Lord of the Deep, the tamer of horses. We are going to speak of Poseidon. To understand Poseidon, we must first understand the world that birthed him. It was not a world of order, of white marble temples and distinct constellations. It was a world of elemental fury. In the beginning, there was the great separation of earth, Gaia, and sky, Uranus. From their union came the Titans, beings of immense raw power, who ruled a cosmos that was still settling into its shape. The king of these Titans was Cronus, a figure of time and harvest, but also of paranoia. Cronus, having usurped his own father, lived in fear of a prophecy, a whisper from the earth itself, that he, too, would be overthrown by his own children. And so he became the devourer of his own legacy. His sister wife, Rhea, the mother of gods, bore him children of extraordinary potential: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades. And as each was born, pulled from the womb of the divine mother, Cronus took them. He opened his great maw and swallowed them whole, trapping their immortal essence within his own stomach, a living prison of flesh and time. Poseidon was one of these children. In the most common accounts, the songs sung by Hesiod and the poets of the mainland, Poseidon shared the dark fate of his siblings. He was born, a being of storms and currents, only to be immediately consumed by the Titan king. Imagine the darkness of that imprisonment. Divine beings, fully conscious, trapped in the timeless void of their father's gut, waiting, growing in resentment and power. But, as with all great myths, the tapestry of history is not woven with a single thread. If you travel to the rugged, mountainous heart of the Peloponnese, to the region of Arcadia, the shepherds and elders tell a different story. They whisper that the Lord of the Sea was never swallowed at all. In this Arcadian tradition, recorded by the traveler Pausanias in the 2nd century, Rhea was desperate to save her son. When she went into labor with Poseidon, she did not do so in the open palaces of the Titans. She fled to a remote spring in Arcadia, a place that would later be known as the Lamb Spring, or Arne. Here, amidst the moss and the cool, flowing waters, she brought forth Poseidon. To deceive the paranoid Cronus, Rhea did something remarkable. She did not give him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, as she would later do for Zeus. Instead, she took a foal, a young horse, and presented it to the Titan. She told Cronus that she had given birth to a creature of the earth. Cronus, blinded by his hunger and fear, swallowed the foal without question. This act, this substitution of the horse for the god, is the first seed of Poseidon's eternal connection to the equine kind. Before he was the god of the sea, in this version, he was the god saved by the horse, the Hippios. And what of the infant god? Rhea could not keep him. She hid him away. In the Arcadian telling, he was concealed among the flocks of lambs grazing near the spring, learning the ways of the earth and the water that bubbled from it. But there is another tradition, one that smells even more strongly of the sea salt. The historian Diodorus Siculus takes us across the wine-dark sea to the island of Rhodes. Here, the myths claim that Rhea entrusted the infant Poseidon to the care of a mysterious and ancient race known as the Telchines. The Telchines were not human, nor were they gods in the Olympian sense. They were sea demons, children of the primordial sea goddess Thalassa. They were master smiths, wizards of metal and magic, who had flippers for hands and the heads of dogs. Imagine the young Poseidon growing up on the shores of Rhodes, nursed by a daughter of the ocean named Caphaera. He was raised to the sound of the Telchines' hammers, striking bronze and iron, the first sounds of industry mixing with the roar of the waves. It was here, some say, that he learned to harness his volatile temper, mirroring the unpredictable nature of the sea wizards who raised him. These Telchines, though later reviled as sorcerers, were the first to forge a weapon for the young god, a tool that would become the very symbol of his authority. Whether he was swallowed and regurgitated, or hidden in a sheepfold, or raised by sea demons, the destiny of Poseidon was inextricably linked to the fall of the old order. The youngest brother, Zeus, was eventually born and successfully hidden in a cave on Crete. When Zeus came of age, he tricked Cronus into drinking an emetic, forcing the Titan to disgorge the children he had consumed. First came the stone, then the brothers and sisters, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, Hestia. They emerged not as infants, but as fully grown gods, their divinity untouched by the acid of time. Poseidon stood by his brother Zeus. The gratitude for his release, or his reunion, was quickly replaced by the necessity of war. The Titans would not surrender their rule of the cosmos quietly. This was the Titanomachy, the 10-year war that shook the foundations of the universe. For a decade, the Olympians fought from Mount Olympus, and the Titans fought from Mount Othrys. The earth groaned under the impact of their blows. The sea boiled, but the forces were deadlocked. Poseidon, wielding his raw strength, was a terror on the battlefield. But strength alone was not enough to breach the Titans' defenses. Gaia, the Earth Mother, prophesied that victory would only come if the Olympians released those whom Cronus had imprisoned in the deepest pit of Tartarus, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the 100-handers. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades descended into the gloom of the underworld. They slew the jailer, the dragon Campa, and unchained their monstrous uncles. The Cyclopes, Brontes, thunder, Steropes, lightning, and Arges, bright, were master craftsmen, much like the Telchines of Rhodes. In gratitude for their freedom, they bestowed upon the three brothers gifts of immense power. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, the weapon of the sky. To Hades, they gave the helm of darkness, the weapon of stealth. And to Poseidon, to the middle brother, they gave the trident. This was no ordinary fishing spear. It was a 3-pronged scepter, forged from the essence of the earthquake and the storm. With this weapon, Poseidon could shatter rocks, call forth springs from dry dust, and whip the placid ocean into a frothing frenzy. It was the physical manifestation of his power, piercing, shaking, and unyielding. With these weapons, and the 100-handed fury of the Hecatonchires hurling boulders like rain, the Olympians launched their final assault. Poseidon, trident in hand, likely led the charge against the maritime Titans, driving back the chaotic waters of the old world. The Titans fell. They were cast down into Tartarus, and the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood victorious over a silent, smoking world. Now came the moment of division. The world was vast, and though Zeus was the architect of the victory, he was not the sole master. In the Iliad, Homer gives us the most direct account of this partition. Poseidon himself speaks of it, his voice filled with the pride of an equal. He says to the messenger Iris, when Zeus dares to command him, "For we are three brothers born of Cronus and Rhea, Zeus and I, and the third is Hades, lord of the dead below. All was divided in three ways, and each was given his domain of honor. They did not fight for the crowns. They respected the ancient law of the lot. They placed the lots in a helmet, perhaps a helmet of giant bronze, and shook it. This was the most solemn of rituals, leaving the fate of the cosmos to chance, or perhaps to the will of the fates themselves. Zeus drew the broad sky, the ether and the clouds. Hades drew the misty darkness, the realm of shadows beneath the earth. And Poseidon? Poseidon drew the gray sea to be his home forever. The earth itself and high Olympus were left common to all three. This detail is crucial to understanding Poseidon's character. He is not a subordinate lieutenant to Zeus. He is a king in his own right, holding a third of the cosmos by equal title. While Zeus rules the meetings on Olympus, Poseidon rules the vast interconnected waterways that encircle the world. He can walk upon the earth with equal authority, for the earth belongs to no single brother. This sense of equality, and the chafing against Zeus's attempts to rule as a monarch, defines much of Poseidon's mythology. He is the brother who remembers that he is a king. Having claimed his domain, Poseidon did not simply vanish into the waves. He built for himself a palace that rivaled the heights of Olympus. Homer describes this dwelling in the 13th book of the Iliad. It is located in the deep waters off Aegean, a location that shifts in the minds of the poets, sometimes near Euboea, sometimes in the deep Aegean Gulf. Imagine descending through the layers of the ocean. The light turns from white to gold, to green, and finally to a heavy twilight indigo. There, in the depths, stands the golden palace of the Sea King. It is imperishable, glittering, built of coral and gold that never tarnishes. The columns are spiraled like the shells of great nautiluses, and the floors are paved with pearls the size of shields. It is here that Poseidon keeps his divine horses. These are not the horses of the earth, though they share their form. These are brazen-hoofed, with flowing manes of gold. When Poseidon yokes them to his chariot, they do not swim, they fly. They skim across the surface of the waves with such speed and grace that the bronze axle of the chariot does not even get wet. And when the king rides out, the sea recognizes its master. The waves, usually so chaotic and rebellious, smooth themselves into a glass-like path. The creatures of the deep, the whales, the dolphins, the Ketos monsters, rise from their lairs. They gambol around his chariot, a joyous, terrifying procession of marine life acknowledging their lord. This is Poseidon in his aspect of Galeaokos, the holder of the earth, and Asphalios, the securer. He can be calm. He can bring safety to sailors. But the sea is rarely calm for long, and neither is its master. Poseidon's temperament is the perfect mirror of the element he rules. He is moody. He is prone to sudden, violent squalls of anger. He is sullen, a word often used to describe the brooding darkness of a storm front gathering on the horizon. Unlike Zeus, whose anger strikes like a sudden bolt of lightning, fast and often quickly over, Poseidon's anger is like a tidal surge. It builds slowly, deep below the surface, and when it crashes, it drowns cities. His physical appearance reflects this raw power. In the statues and the descriptions of the poets, he is a mature man, much like Zeus. He has a thick, curly beard, often described as dark blue or sea green. Titanomachy, the dark-haired one. His chest is broad, barrel-like, capable of holding the breath of the deep. But where Zeus is often calm and regal, holding a scepter, Poseidon is dynamic. He is almost always leaning forward, trident raised, muscles tensed, ready to strike the earth and make it tremble. He is the Enosikthon, the earth shaker, the force that reminds humanity that the ground beneath their feet is not as solid as they believe. Yet, a king needs a queen. Zeus had Hera. Hades had Persephone. Poseidon, alone in his golden palace, sought a consort who could match the vastness of his realm. His eyes fell upon the Nereids. The Nereids were the 50 daughters of Nereus, the old man of the sea, an ancient deity who predated the Olympian rule. They were the spirits of the salt spray, the foam, and the gentle currents. Among them, dancing on the shores of the island of Naxos, was Amphitrite. Amphitrite was not merely a sea nymph. She was the personification of the sea surrounding the earth. When Poseidon first saw her, he was captivated by her grace and the wildness in her eyes. He approached her, intending to court her, perhaps with the same aggressive entitlement his brother Zeus often displayed. But Amphitrite wanted no part of the brooding, violent god. She fled. She swam far to the west, beyond the pillars of Heracles, hiding herself near the Titan Atlas, who held up the sky. She sought to lose herself in the vastness of the Atlantic, far from Poseidon's reach. But Poseidon would not be deterred. He did not chase her himself, knowing that his fury might drive her further away. Instead, he sent his scouts, the creatures of the deep, to find her. The most clever of these scouts was Delphinus, the dolphin. Delphinus did not try to drag Amphitrite back. He swam to her and spoke to her. With the clicking, singing language of the cetaceans, he pleaded Poseidon's case. He spoke not of the god's anger, but of his majesty, of the order he brought to the chaotic waters, and of the honor it would be to rule beside him as the queen of the deep. Delphinus was persuasive. He charmed the reluctant nymph, turning her fear into curiosity, and her curiosity into love. Amphitrite agreed to return. In gratitude for this service, Poseidon took the image of the dolphin and cast it into the stars, creating the constellation Delphinus, which still swims in the night sky today. The wedding of Poseidon and Amphitrite was a celebration of the elements. It united the new Olympian order with the ancient lineage of Nereus. Amphitrite sat beside Poseidon in the golden palace at Aegean. Unlike the often contentious marriage of Zeus and Hera, the union of Poseidon and Amphitrite was relatively stable, though not without its infidelities on Poseidon's part. Amphitrite, for the most part, accepted the wild nature of her husband, much as the sea accepts the rivers that flow into it. Together, they bore children. The most famous was Triton, a merman of immense size. Hesiod describes him as having the upper body of a man and the lower body of a fish. He became the herald of his father, wielding a twisted conch shell. When Triton blew upon this shell, the sound was so loud it could calm the waves or send giants fleeing in terror. He is the trumpeter of the deep, the voice of the sea's power. They also had a daughter, Rhode, who would give her name to the island where Poseidon was raised, in the Diodorus version, and would become the bride of the sun god, Helios. This connection between the sea and the sun would play out again and again in Poseidon's myths, particularly in the contests for the dominion of cities. But Poseidon's ambition was not limited to the waves. He was the earth shaker, and he desired the worship of men on dry land. He looked upon the rising city-states of Greece, Athens, Corinth, Argos, and he coveted them. He wanted to be their patron, their protector, the name upon their lips when they poured libations. And so began the great contests, the divine litigations that would shape the geography and the religion of Greece. The most famous of these was the contest for Athens. The city on the Acropolis was beautiful, strategically placed, and destined for greatness. Both Poseidon and his niece, the gray-eyed Athena, claimed it. The dispute became so heated that Zeus, seeking to avoid a war between his brother and his favorite daughter, decreed a contest. They would each present a gift to the people of the city, or to the king, Cecrops, and the city would choose the victor. They gathered on the high rock of the Acropolis. The king, Cecrops, half man and half serpent, stood as witness. Poseidon stepped forward first. He wanted to demonstrate his power, his ability to bring martial strength and prosperity through the sea. He raised his trident high and brought it down with a thunderous crash upon the hard limestone of the Acropolis. Crack! The rock split open. From the fissure, a spring of water gushed forth. In some versions, a magnificent horse leaped from the rock, symbolizing war and transportation. But in the most enduring telling, it was a spring of water. The people rushed to taste it, hoping for fresh water to quench their thirst. But they spat it out immediately. It was salt water. Poseidon had given them the sea, a path to trade, a navy, an empire. But he had not given them the immediate sustenance of life. The Sea of Erechtheus, as this salt well was called, remained a sacred spot in the Erechtheion for centuries, where the sound of waves could allegedly be heard when the south wind blew. Then it was Athena's turn. She stepped forward quietly. She knelt and planted a seed in the earth. Within moments, a tree sprung up, gnarled, silver-leafed, and heavy with fruit. It was the olive tree. The gift was undeniable. The olive provided wood for fire and building, oil for lamps and cooking, and fruit for eating. It was a symbol of peace and prosperity. Cecrops, or the 12 Olympian judges in other versions, declared Athena the winner. The city would be called Athens, not Poseidonia. Poseidon took the loss poorly. As we have established, his anger is a flood. In his fury at being rejected, he sent the waves crashing over the Thriasian plain, flooding the countryside of Attica and turning fertile fields into salt marshes. It took time and many sacrifices to soothe the god's wounded pride. The Athenians, wise to the power of the sea, continued to worship him, arguably with as much fervor as they did Athena. They honored him as Poseidon Erechtheus on the very Acropolis where he lost. acknowledging that while wisdom ruled the city, the power of the sea underpinned its existence. The salt has dried on the plains of Attica. The olive tree of Athena stands rooted in the Acropolis, a testament to the city's choice. But the earth-shaker does not rest. The sea is a restless entity, constantly seeking to expand its shoreline, constantly gnawing at the boundaries of the land. And so, denied the crown of Athens, Poseidon turned his gaze elsewhere. He looked to the narrow strip of land that connects the Peloponnese to the mainland, the Isthmus of Corinth. Corinth was a prize of immense value. It was the gateway between two seas, the master of trade, a place where the wealth of the world flowed like a river. But Poseidon was not the only god who coveted this land. The sun himself, Helios, who sees all things from his chariot high above, also laid claim to it. Imagine the tension of this contest. On one side, the deep, heavy blue of the sea. On the other, the searing, blinding white of the sun. Fire and water clashing over the rock. But unlike the contest for Athens, which was decided by a vote of the citizens or the gods, this dispute required a mediator of primal strength. They called upon Briareus. Briareus was one of the Hecaton Shires, the 100 Handers whom Poseidon had helped liberate from Tartarus. He was a being of such immense size and power that even the gods hesitated to anger him. Briareus sat upon the ridge of the isthmus, his 100 hands resting on the mountains, and he delivered his judgment. He would not give the land to one and leave the other with nothing. He sought balance. To Helios, the sun, Briareus awarded the Acrocorinth, the towering citadel that rises sharply above the city, catching the first and last rays of the day. It belonged to the sky. But to Poseidon, Briareus gave the isthmus itself, the low-lying neck of land embraced by the waves on both sides. This verdict satisfied the earth-shaker. The isthmus became one of his most sacred sanctuaries. It was here that the pine forests whispered his name, and here that the Isthmian Games would later be founded in his honor, a festival of athletics and horse racing second only to Olympia. But Poseidon's hunger for dominion was not fully sated. He turned his eyes south to the fertile plains of Argos. This was the land of heroes, ancient and proud. But once again, he found his path blocked. This time, it was not a niece or a nephew, but his own sister, the Queen of Heaven, Hera. Hera claimed Argos as her own. The dispute was bitter. Poseidon, perhaps tired of the judgments of Olympian gods who might favor the queen, agreed to submit the case to the spirits of the land itself, the river gods. Inachus, Cephissus, and Asterion, the ancient rivers of the Argolid, were called to judge. They looked at the history of their land, they looked at the temples, and they declared for Hera. Poseidon's reaction was immediate and devastating. In Athens, he had flooded the land with salt water. In Argos, he did the opposite. If the river gods would not support him, then the river gods would cease to exist. He struck the earth with his trident, not to open a spring, but to seal the aquifers. He withdrew his waters. To this day, the rivers of the Argolid are dusty, stony beds for much of the year, flowing only when the rains come heavy from the sky. It is a dry, thirsty land, a permanent reminder of the day the Sea King took his water and left. This is the dual nature of Poseidon. Gaeochos. He is the giver of moisture, the nourisher of plants, but he is also the one who can leave the earth parched and barren. Yet, even in his anger, there are moments of creation. During this great drought in Argos, a tragedy of thirst unfolded that led to a myth of strange intimacy. King Danaus sent his 50 daughters to search for water. One of them, Amymone, wandered deep into the dry forests. There, she was accosted by a satyr, a wild spirit of the woods. In her terror, she cried out to the only power greater than the earth. She cried out to Poseidon. Poseidon heard. He appeared, scattering the satyr with a mere gesture of his trident. He looked upon Amymone, standing in the dust of the land he had cursed. He was moved by her beauty, and perhaps by her desperation. They became lovers there, in the dry heat. And where they lay, Poseidon struck a rock with his trident. This time he did not hold back. A triple spring of cool, fresh water burst forth. The spring of Lerna. It was a gift of life in a land of punishment, a hydrologic anomaly that would become the lair of the Hydra generations later. We move now from the sun-baked rocks of Argos to a darker, cooler sanctuary, and to a story that is often misunderstood in the modern mind. We move to the story of Medusa. In the Roman retelling by Ovid, which gives us the most atmospheric detail, Medusa was not born a monster. She was a maiden of extraordinary beauty, the most lovely of the Gorgon sisters. Her hair, they say, was her glory, locks of gold that flowed like spun sunlight. Poseidon saw her. He is the sea, and the sea wants what is beautiful. He pursued her. Medusa fled, seeking sanctuary in the one place she thought safe, the temple of Athena. She ran into the cool marble halls, clinging to the statue of the virgin goddess. But Poseidon's passion is a storm surge. It does not respect the boundaries of sanctuary. He entered the temple. There, on the sacred floor, the Sea Lord lay with her. Athena's wrath was cold and terrible, but she did not punish her uncle, the powerful earth shaker. She turned her eyes upon the victim, the woman who had defiled her sacred space. She punished Medusa for the beauty that had attracted the god. She took that golden hair and twisted it. The strands thickened, hissed, and became living serpents. Her face, once lovely, became a mask of horror that turned men to stone. But the seed of Poseidon is potent. It does not perish, even in a curse. Medusa, now a monster, lived in isolation on the edge of the world, carrying the children of the sea god within her. Years later, when the hero Perseus, guided by Athena, severed the Gorgon's head, a miracle occurred. From the severed neck, from the blood of the earth-born monster, two beings sprang forth. First came Chrysaor, the golden-sworded, a warrior of immense stature, and second came Pegasus, a horse, but not a horse of the earth, a horse with the wings of an eagle, pure white, born of blood and sea foam. Pegasus is the ultimate expression of Poseidon's connection to the horse, elevated to the celestial. He is the storm cloud that flies, the thundering hooves in the sky. He is beautiful, wild, and untamable by any but the gods. This connection to the horse, Poseidon Hippios, is not an incidental trait. It is one of his oldest aspects, perhaps older even than his human form. In the isolated valleys of Arcadia, far from the sea, there is a myth that speaks to this primal, animalistic nature. It involves his sister, Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Demeter was wandering the earth, grieving the loss of her daughter Persephone. She was exhausted, wearing the guise of an old woman, her divine radiance dimmed by sorrow. Poseidon, ever the pursuer, saw her. He desired her. But Demeter, heavy with grief, wanted no lover. To escape him, she transformed. She dropped to all fours. Her skin lengthened into a coat of hair. Her hands became hooves. She became a mare, and hid herself among a herd of horses, grazing in the valley of Ocean. But you cannot deceive the lord of horses with the shape of a horse. Poseidon saw through the disguise. He did not turn away. He too transformed. His divine form dissolved, muscles rippling, bones shifting, until he stood as a stallion, massive, powerful, breathing steam into the mountain air. There, among the herd, the stallion mounted the mare. It was a union of pure elemental force, the earth's fertility, and the earth's shaker combined in animal form. Demeter was furious at this violation. For a long time she was known in that region as Demeter Erenice, the Fury. She washed her anger away in the river Ladon, becoming Demeter Lucia, the bather. From this union, 2 offspring were born. The first was a daughter, whose name was kept secret, known only to the initiates of the mysteries as Despoina, the mistress. She was a goddess of the Arcadian cults, older and darker than the Olympian order. The second child was Arion. Like Pegasus, Arion was a horse, but he was black-maned, immortal, and possessed the gift of human speech. Arion was a creature of speed and wildness, later tamed by the hero Adrastus. In these children, Pegasus, the white-winged horse, and Arion, the black earth-bound steed, we see the full spectrum of Poseidon's dominion: the sky and the earth, the foam and the depth. Let us leave the wilds of Arcadia now and travel east, across the Aegean, to the windswept plains of the Troad. Here, overlooking the Hellespont, stood the city of Troy. But before the famous war, before Hector and Achilles, there was the reign of King Laomedon, and here we find Poseidon in a state of servitude. Why would a god serve a mortal? Homer tells us in the Iliad that it was by the command of Zeus. Some say it was a punishment for a failed rebellion against the king of gods, a time when Poseidon, Hera, and Athena conspired to bind Zeus in chains. As penance, Poseidon and his nephew Apollo were stripped of their divine authority for a year and forced to serve King Laomedon of Troy for wages. Imagine the indignity. The earth-shaker, who splits mountains, forced to stack stones. Apollo, the god of light, was tasked with herding Laomedon's cattle on the slopes of Mount Ida. But Poseidon was the builder. He toiled under the sun, hauling the massive limestone blocks that would form the legendary walls of Troy. These were the walls that would later defy the Achaean army for 10 years. They were impregnable because they were built by the hands of a god. The year passed. The walls stood tall and gleaming. The gods, their penance complete, stood before King Laomedon and asked for the wages they had been promised. Laomedon, foolish and arrogant, blinded by his own mortality, refused them. Not only did he refuse to pay, but he threatened them. He threatened to bind their hands and feet and sell them into slavery in distant islands. He even threatened to cut off their ears with a bronze knife. Apollo, surprisingly, remained relatively calm. But Poseidon does not forgive insults. He left Troy in a fury that shook the very foundations of the walls he had just built. He did not destroy the walls, his own handiwork, but he turned the sea against the land. He sent a flood. The sea water rose, swallowing the crops and the villages of the Troad. And with the flood came the monster, the Cetus, a sea dragon of immense proportions, sent to devour the people of the lying king. The oracle declared that the only way to appease the earth-shaker was sacrifice. King Laomedon had to chain his own daughter, Hesione, to the rocks by the sea, an offering to the monster. It is a grim echo of the Andromeda myth. The princess chained, the monster approaching through the surf. But unlike Andromeda, Hesione was not saved by Perseus. She was saved by Heracles, who happened to be passing. Heracles offered to kill the monster in exchange for the divine horses of Troy, horses that Zeus had given Laomedon's grandfather. Laomedon agreed. Heracles leaped into the throat of the beast and slew it from the inside. But Laomedon, true to his treacherous nature, cheated Heracles just as he had cheated Poseidon. He refused to give up the horses. This second betrayal sealed the fate of Troy. Heracles would later return with a small army and sack the city, killing Laomedon and placing the young Priam on the throne. But Poseidon never forgot. His hatred for Troy was etched into the bedrock of his immortal memory. This grudge explains Poseidon's role in the great Trojan War that would follow a generation later. While other gods like Apollo and Ares supported the Trojans, Poseidon was staunchly pro-Achaean. He remembered the insults of Laomedon. He remembered the threats. When he looked at the gleaming walls of Troy, he did not see his own architectural triumph. He saw the monument of a king who refused to pay his debts. In the Iliad, we see Poseidon as the great bolsterer of the Greek morale. When Zeus forbids the gods from interfering, Poseidon often ignores the order or circumvents it. He moves among the Greek ranks disguised as the seer Calchas, tapping the exhausted warriors with his staff, filling their limbs with fresh strength. He is the gatherer of clouds at sea, but on land, he is the gatherer of men. There is a moment of profound atmosphere in the Iliad where Poseidon sits atop the wooded peak of Samothrace, looking out over the battle. He sees the Greeks suffering. His heart is seized with grief and anger. He descends the mountain with such colossal strides that the forests and the peaks tremble beneath his feet. 3 steps, 4 steps, and he is at Aegean. He yokes his chariot and drives out across the waves to Troy. When Zeus sends Iris to command Poseidon to leave the battlefield, to stop helping the Greeks, we hear the full voice of the offended brother. He reminds Zeus of their equality. "I will not walk by the will of Zeus," he thunders. "Let him stay quiet in his own third portion," though he eventually withdraws, grudgingly, to avoid a cosmic civil war. His heart remains with the destroyers of Troy. Yet, Poseidon is not a god of blind malice. He possesses a strange, unpredictable sense of pity and propriety. In Book 20 of the Iliad, when the Trojan hero Aeneas faces Achilles, Aeneas is outmatched. He is about to die. But it is destined that Aeneas must survive to continue the Dardanian line. Even though Poseidon hates Troy, he respects fate. He intervenes. He casts a mist over Achilles' eyes and hurls Aeneas high over the lines of battle to safety. He saves the Trojan, saying that Aeneas is innocent and has always given good gifts to the gods. This is the complexity of the Earthshaker. He can drown a city for a slight, yet save a hero of that same city because of piety. He is tempestuous, yes, but he follows the deep, rhythmic laws of the cosmos, just as the tide follows the moon. The smoke of Troy has faded into the sky. The great walls, built by a god and breached by the trickery of a wooden horse, are nothing but rubble. The war is over. But for the victors, the journey is far from complete. For the Greeks, the return home, the nostos, lay across the wine-dark back of the sea, and the sea has a long memory. We enter now into the most famous chapter of Poseidon's mythology, the decade of wrath chronicled in Homer's Odyssey. It is often said that the Trojan War was the will of Zeus, but the Odyssey is the story of the will of Poseidon. While the other gods, even Athena, eventually softened their hearts toward the weary Odysseus, Poseidon remained unyielding. His anger was not merely a storm, it was a blockade. It was a personal vendetta, etched into the waves. And it began not with a slight against Poseidon himself, but against his blood. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, wandering the unknown waters, came to the land of the Cyclopes. These were not the smith gods who forged the lightning bolts. These were a wilder breed, shepherds living in lawless isolation. Among them was Polyphemus. Polyphemus was vast, a giant of crude strength, with a single eye set in the center of his forehead, and he was the son of Poseidon and the nymph Medusa. Imagine the damp, cavernous home of the Cyclops, the smell of raw milk, of sheep wool, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Odysseus and his men entered this cave, seeking hospitality, Xenia, the sacred law of Zeus. But Polyphemus cared nothing for Zeus. He was a son of the sea. He devoured Odysseus's men, 2 by 2, crunching their bones like twigs. To escape, Odysseus devised a plan of brilliant cruelty. He intoxicated the giant with unmixed wine, and when Polyphemus fell into a stupor, Odysseus and his surviving men took a stake of olive wood, symbolically the wood of Athena, heated it in the fire until it glowed red, and drove it into the giant's single eye. The hiss of the burning eye echoed through the cave, a sound of agony that would reach the ears of the deep. As Odysseus fled on his ship, his hubris got the better of him. He called out his true name to the blinded, raging giant on the shore. If any man asks you who blinded you, say it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes. This was his mistake. For now, the curse had a name. Polyphemus waded into the surf, washing his bleeding socket in the salt water of his father. He raised his hands to the starry sky and prayed. He did not pray to the Olympians on the mountain. He prayed to the Cyanochites, the dark-haired one below. Hear me, Poseidon, earth enfolder, thou dark-haired god. If truly I am thy son, and thou avowest thyself my father, grant that Odysseus may never reach his home. But if it is his fate to see his friends, may he come late and in evil plight, and find trouble in his house. Poseidon heard. The bond between the sea god and his monstrous children is profound. He does not judge them for their brutality. He protects them because they are of his essence. The blinding of Polyphemus was an assault on Poseidon's own honor. From that moment, the sea turned against Odysseus. For 10 years, Poseidon shook the earth in Odysseus's path. He sent squalls that shattered rafts. He confused the currents. He kept the hero trapped on the island of Ogygia. And even when the other gods convened to allow Odysseus to return, Poseidon was absent, visiting the Ethiopians. And upon his return, seeing Odysseus near safety, he gathered the clouds in a fresh rage. "Outrageous!" he bellowed. "The gods have changed their minds while I was away." And with a sweep of his trident, he smashed Odysseus's raft, forcing him to swim for days. This is Poseidon as the relentless pursuer, the god who holds a grudge as deep as the Mariana Trench. But the wrath of Poseidon is not limited to the guilty. It can fall upon the helpful, too. This is seen in the tragic fate of the Phaeacians. The Phaeacians were a seafaring people, master navigators, who lived on the island of Scheria. They were dear to the gods, and their ships, which had no steersmen or rudders, could read the thoughts of men and travel instantly across the sea. When Odysseus washed up on their shores, battered by Poseidon's storms, the Phaeacians, led by King Alcinous, showed him perfect hospitality. They loaded him with gifts and sailed him home to Ithaca while he slept, depositing him safely on his native sand. They defied the will of the sea god by helping his enemy. Poseidon saw their ship returning from Ithaca, skimming over the waves like a seabird. He went to Zeus and complained. He felt dishonored. "Men will no longer respect me," he argued, "if mortals like the Phaeacians can escort my victim to safety without consequence." Zeus, wishing to placate his powerful brother, allowed him a terrible vengeance. As the Phaeacian ship approached its home harbor, with the citizens watching from the walls, Poseidon rose from the deep. He did not use a storm. He used his hand. He struck the ship with the flat of his hand, and instantly the wood turned to stone. The sails, the mast, the hull, all petrified. The ship became a rock, rooted to the bottom of the sea, blocking the harbor mouth. It was a permanent monument to the god's displeasure, a warning that even kindness can be punished if it cross the will of the earth-shaker. Yet, Poseidon is not only the father of monsters and the punisher of sailors. He is also the progenitor of heroes. While he hounded Odysseus, he was the divine father of one of Greece's greatest kings, Theseus. The lineage of Theseus takes us away from the rough seas to the calmer waters of the Saronic Gulf, to the small island of Sphaeria near Troezen. Aethra was the daughter of King Pythias of Troezen. She was a woman of virtue, destined for greatness. One night, guided by a dream sent by Athena, she waded across the shallow strait to the island of Sphaeria to pour a libation to the hero Sphaerus. There, in the moonlight, Poseidon came to her. It is said that on that same night, the mortal king Aegean of Athens also lay with Aethra. This created a dual paternity, a common trope in Greek myth. Theseus was born with two fathers, one mortal, giving him a claim to the throne of Athens, and one divine, giving him strength beyond measure. Theseus would grow up believing he was the son of Aegeus, but the sea whispered in his blood. The revelation of his divine parentage is beautifully told by the lyric poet Bacchylides in his 17th ode. It occurs during Theseus's journey to Crete, as one of the sacrificial youths sent to the Minotaur. On the ship, King Minos of Crete, a son of Zeus, was harassing one of the Athenian maidens. Theseus stood up to him. Minos sneered at the young hero. "You claim to be the son of Poseidon?" Minos asked. "Prove it." Minos pulled a gold ring from his finger and hurled it into the deep sea. "If you are truly the son of the earth shaker, fetch this ring." Then Minos prayed to his father Zeus, and a clap of thunder answered him, a sign of his own divine lineage. Theseus did not hesitate. He did not pray. He acted. He stood on the gunwale of the ship and dove. The waters did not crush him. Instead, they embraced him. Bacchylides describes the scene with dreamlike clarity. Dolphins swarmed around him, guiding him down through the twilight waters until he reached the hall of his father. There, Theseus saw the Nereids dancing with weaving feet, their limbs glowing like fire in the dark water. He saw his stepmother, Amphitrite, the queen of the deep. Poseidon was not explicitly mentioned as being present in some translations, but his presence was felt in the architecture of the palace. It was Amphitrite who welcomed the boy. She did not treat him as a bastard son of her husband's affair. She treated him as a prince. She draped a purple cloak around his shoulders. She placed a wreath of dark roses, or gold in some versions, on his head. And, almost as an afterthought, she gave him the ring that Minos had thrown. Theseus shot back up to the surface, dry and radiant, appearing beside the ship like a god. Minos was silenced. The sea had acknowledged its son. This connection between Theseus and Poseidon remained strong throughout the hero's life. When Theseus eventually unified Attica, he reaffirmed the worship of Poseidon. But tragically, it was also Poseidon who brought about the end of Theseus's son, Hippolytus. Hippolytus, a chaste young man devoted to Artemis, was cursed by his father Theseus due to a lie told by Phaedra, Theseus's wife. Theseus, believing his son had assaulted Phaedra, used one of 3 wishes granted to him by Poseidon. He prayed to his father, "If these wishes are true, kill my son this day." Poseidon was bound by his promise. He did not investigate. He acted. As Hippolytus drove his chariot along the coast road of Trojan, the sea began to boil. An enormous wave rose up, defying the physics of the tide. From the crest of the wave, a bull, a monstrous bellowing sea bull, emerged. The horses of Hippolytus, terrified by the supernatural beast, panicked. They smashed the chariot against the rocks, dragging the young prince to his death. It was a brutal fulfillment of a father's wish by a grandfather's power. It shows once again that Poseidon's power is a blunt instrument. When called upon, he shakes the earth. He does not measure the moral consequences. We see this blunt force again in the story of the Argonauts. Poseidon is not the central figure of the Argo's voyage, but his influence is ubiquitous. The ship itself was built with wood from Pelion, but the journey was across his domain. He is the father of the helmsman of the Argo, Euphemus. To Euphemus, Poseidon gave a marvelous gift: the ability to walk on water. Euphemus could run across the swell of the sea without wetting his feet, his toes just skimming the spray. It is from a clod of earth given to Euphemus that the island of Thera, Santorini, was eventually formed, a volcanic island born of the sea, perfectly fitting for the son of the earth shaker. In the Roman epic Argonautica, by Valerius Flaccus, Poseidon, Neptune, plays a more active role in the launch of the first ship. He is initially angry at the hubris of men sailing his waters, invading his silent realm. "What is this?" he rumbles. "Do they seek to conquer the blue as they have the land?" But it is prophecy that stays his hand. He allows the Argo to pass, knowing that the age of heroes requires the sea to become a road, not just a barrier. Poseidon's progeny are endless, and they are rarely ordinary. We have spoken of the horse Arion, the winged Pegasus, the cyclops Polyphemus, and the hero Theseus. But there are others. There is the giant hunter Orion, whom Poseidon gave the power to wade through the deepest ocean with his head still above the waves. There are the Aloids, Otus and Ephialtes, giants who tried to pile Mount Pelion on Mount Ossa to storm Olympus. Poseidon saved them initially from the wrath of Apollo, though they eventually fell. And there is Antaeus, the wrestler of Libya. He was the son of Poseidon and Gaia. He drew his strength from the earth, his mother, but he possessed the ferocity of his father. He forced travelers to wrestle him, killing them and using their skulls to roof his temple to Poseidon. It took Heracles to lift him off the ground, severing his connection to Gaia, to crush him. Even here, Poseidon represents the raw, untamed danger of the wild places, the father of beings who challenge civilization. The myths of heroes and monsters fade into the mists of time, but the stones remain. If you walk along the coastlines of Greece today, where the wind whips the pine trees and the salt spray crusts on the rocks, you can still feel him. We move now from the stories told around the fire to the rituals performed at the altar. We move to the worship of the Earth Shaker, a worship born of fear, respect, and the desperate need for stability in a shaking world. Let us return to the Isthmus of Corinth, that narrow neck of land Poseidon won from Helios. Here, the pine trees grow tall and dark green against the limestone. This is the site of the Isthmian Games, one of the 4 great Panhellenic festivals. But unlike the Olympics, which were founded in glory for Zeus, the Isthmian Games were born of tragedy and water. The myth begins with Ino, a daughter of Cadmus. Pursued by her maddened husband, Athamas, she fled to the Malurian Rock, a sheer cliff overlooking the Saronic Gulf. In her arms, she clutched her youngest son, Melicertes. With nowhere left to run, she leaped. They fell into the embrace of the sea. But Poseidon did not let them die. At the request of Aphrodite, Ino's grandmother, or perhaps simply out of pity for a mother seeking sanctuary in his domain, he transformed them. Ino became the sea goddess Leucothea, the white goddess of the sea foam, a savior of sailors in distress. It was she who would later give her veil to Odysseus to save him from drowning. But the boy, Melicertes, his body was carried by a dolphin, the sacred messenger of Poseidon, to the shores of the isthmus. There, Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, found him lying under a pine tree. Recognizing the divine touch, Sisyphus buried the boy with royal honors and established the Isthmian Games to propitiate the spirits of the deep. Imagine the atmosphere of these games. They were held every 2 years. The victors were not crowned with laurel, the leaf of Apollo, nor with olive, the leaf of Athena. They were crowned with wreaths of dry wild celery, or, in later times, pine branches. The pine, sacred to Poseidon, represented the connection between the sea spray and the coastal forests. The stadium sat so close to the temple of Poseidon that the roar of the crowd would mix with the roar of the waves. Inside the temple stood a statue of the god, immense and imposing, flanked by tritons. But beneath the earth, in the hidden adyton of the temple, it was said that the subterranean waters flowed, a direct link to the watery abyss beneath the crust of the world. Worship here was not just about athletic prowess. It was about appeasing the force that could shatter the land bridge and turn the Peloponnese into an island. The sacrifices offered to Poseidon were distinct, visceral, and dark. While the Olympians of the sky loved the white smoke of burning fat rising upward, Poseidon often demanded something that sank. He is the god of the black animals. In the Odyssey, when Telemachus arrives at Pylos, he finds Nestor and his people on the black sands of the beach. They are sacrificing distinctively 81 black bulls, 9 bulls for each of the 9 companies of men. The black color represents the dark depths of the sea and the fertile, dark earth. The blood flows into the sand and is washed away by the tide, a direct feeding of the god. But the most haunting ritual belongs to the Argives. In a place called Dyne, a freshwater spring that rises mysteriously from the sea itself, the ancient Argives would perform a sacrifice to Poseidon, Hippios, the horse lord. They would take living horses, bridled and adorned, and cast them into the churning waters. Visualize this moment. The terrified whinnying of the horses, the splash as they break the surface, and then the silence as the current drags them down. It was a brutal exchange, a life of the earth given to the Lord of the Deep, ensuring that the fresh water would continue to rise and the salt water would stay at bay. It acknowledges that the horse, the creature of movement and power, ultimately belongs to the one who created it. We cannot speak of the complete life of Poseidon without speaking of his greatest and most tragic domain. We must speak of Atlantis. While many dismiss it as mere allegory, in the context of mythology, it is the ultimate expression of Poseidon's nature as a creator and a destroyer. The philosopher Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, describes this lost empire in vivid detail. When the gods divided the earth, as we spoke of in the beginning, Poseidon received the island of Atlantis. It was a paradise, larger than Libya and Asia combined, situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles. In the center of this island lived a mortal woman named Clito. Poseidon fell in love with her. To protect her, and perhaps to isolate her, Poseidon used his powers to shape the land itself. He carved the island into concentric rings, zones of water and zones of land, perfectly circular, one inside the other. 2 rings of land and 3 of water. He made it so that no ship could reach the center island where he and Clito dwelt. He brought up 2 springs from the earth, one of warm water and one of cold, making the land abundantly fertile. Here, Poseidon fathered 5 sets of twin sons. The eldest was Atlas, not the Titan, but a king, who gave his name to the island and the ocean around it. These 10 kings ruled over a civilization of unparalleled wealth and engineering prowess. The central temple of Poseidon and Clito was a marvel that defies imagination. Plato tells us it was surrounded by a golden enclosure. The temple itself was coated in silver, with pinnacles of gold. The interior roof was made of ivory, variegated with gold, silver, and orichalcum, a mysterious red metal that glowed like fire, second in value only to gold. Inside stood the statue of the god, so tall his head touched the roof. He was driving a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses, surrounded by 100 nereids on dolphins. It was the ultimate shrine to the Sea King, built by his own descendants. The laws of Atlantis were inscribed on a pillar of orichalcum in the center of the temple. Every 5 and 6 years, the kings would gather. They would hunt a bull in the sacred precinct, without weapons, using only staves and nooses, and sacrifice it over the pillar, letting the blood run down the inscriptions. They would drink from golden cups and swear to uphold the laws of Poseidon. But the blood of the god grew thin. Over generations, the divine essence of Poseidon was diluted by mortal admixture. The Atlanteans became arrogant. They became greedy. They ceased to carry their prosperity with moderation. They launched an imperial war against the peoples of the Mediterranean, seeking to enslave Athens and Egypt. Zeus saw this corruption. He gathered the gods, and though the text of the Critias cuts off before the judgment is fully rendered, we know the outcome. Poseidon, who had built the rings of water and land, was now the instrument of their undoing. In a single day and night of misfortune, Plato writes, the earth shook. The Enosikthon struck. The ground liquefied. And the great island of Atlantis, with all its orichalcum walls, its elephants, its canals, and its golden temple to Poseidon, sank beneath the waves. It disappeared into the muddy shoals of the Atlantic. This is the supreme paradox of Poseidon. He is the father who drowns his own children when they lose their way. He creates the perfect city, and he allows the sea to reclaim it. It is a reminder that in the Greek mind, nothing built by hands or even by gods is permanent against the power of the tide. Let us return to the solid ground of Greece for one final pilgrimage. Let us go to Sunion. At the southernmost tip of Attica, standing on a sheer cliff that drops 60 meters to the Aegean, stands the temple of Poseidon. The white marble columns, bleached by the sun and salt, still stand today. Imagine standing there at sunset. The sky turns violet. The sea turns a deep, wine-dark purple. Sailors rounding this cape would look up and see the gleaming white columns, a beacon of safety and a warning of power. They would offer a prayer. Poseidon Asphalios, keep the timbers of my ship true. Keep the storms in your chest. Throughout the ancient world, he was invoked by many names, each a facet of his complex personality. He was Poseidon Soter, the savior who guided ships through the fog. He was Poseidon Taurios, the bull god, bellowing in the earthquake. He was Poseidon Phytalmios, the nurturer of plants, for he controlled the freshwater table that fed the roots. And he was Poseidon Petraios, the rock lord, for the cliffs were his throne. Unlike Zeus, who is often distant, ruling from the high ether, Poseidon is immediate. He is the rumble in the ground. He is the sudden squall. He is the terrifying depth beneath the keel. He represents the subconscious fear of the unknown, the dark spaces where light does not reach, but where life teems in abundance. His life, if a god can be said to have a life, is a cycle of storms and calms. He was swallowed by his father and reborn. He fought the Titans and imprisoned them. He built palaces of gold and walls of stone. He loved nymphs, goddesses, and monsters. He fathered horses and heroes. He grudged against cities and drowned continents. Listen to the sound of the waves again. Whoosh, crash, whoosh, crash. That is his heartbeat. It has not stopped. The temples may be ruins, the statues may be broken, and the fires of the sacrifices may be cold ash, but the sea remains. Whenever the ground trembles, however slightly, whenever a storm darkens the horizon, whenever you stand on the shore and feel the immense, crushing weight of the blue water stretching out to infinity. You are standing in his court. You are a guest in the house of the Earth Shaker. As the tide recedes, leaving the sand smooth and new, let your breath settle. Let the calm of the Galliokos, the Earth Holder, secure your mind. If you enjoyed this journey into the deep, if you felt the salt spray and heard the call of the conch shell, please leave a like a gentle wave upon the shore. Subscribe to join us at the hearth for more myths from the ancient world. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as vast and deep as the sea. The tide recedes, but it always returns. We have spoken of the great arcs of Poseidon's life, his birth, his palaces, and his most famous wars. But the ocean is vast, and there are countless bays and hidden grottos we have yet to explore. To truly understand the Lord of the Deep, we must look not just at the tidal waves that destroy continents, but at the currents that shape the history of families and the laws of gods. Pour yourself another cup of tea, wrap the blanket tighter, and let us descend once more into the blue. We travel now to the city of Athens, long before the golden age of democracy, to a time when the gods walked the streets alongside mortals. We stand on the rocky outcrop known as the Areopagus, the Hill of Ares. Today, it is a place of tourists and ruins, but in the mythic age, it was the site of the first murder trial in history. And at the center of this trial stood Poseidon. Poseidon had a son named Halirrhothius. Like many of the sea gods' offspring, Halirrhothius was wild, driven by passions that flowed as fiercely as the rip currents. He desired Alcippe, a daughter of the war god Ares. But Alcippe did not desire him. On the slopes of the Acropolis, near a sacred spring, Halirrhothius attempted to force himself upon the girl. Ares, the god of war, saw this violation. His reaction was swift and bloody. He descended from Olympus, not with a bolt of lightning, but with a spear. He struck Halirrhothius down, killing the son of Poseidon instantly. Now, consider the position of Poseidon. His son lay dead, slain by his own nephew. The Earth Shaker's instinct is to retaliate, to drown the city, to shatter the earth. But here we see a different aspect of the god. Instead of war, Poseidon demanded justice. He summoned Ares to trial. The 12 Olympian gods gathered on the hill to judge the case. It was a solemn assembly, the first of its kind. Poseidon stood as the prosecutor. He argued that murder, even by a god, could not go unanswered. He spoke of the sanctity of life and the grief of a father. He did not deny his son's crime, but he argued that death was a disproportionate punishment, executed without trial. Ares stood as the defense, arguing the right of a father to protect his daughter's honor. The gods voted. In a decision that would shape Athenian law forever, they acquitted Ares, ruling that the killing was justified to prevent a violation. Poseidon lost the case, yet, in losing, Poseidon established a vital precedent. He showed that even the most volatile of the gods recognized the need for law, for a venue where grievances could be weighed like cargo on a ship. This trial consecrated the Areopagus as the High Court of Athens for homicide cases. It is a reminder that Poseidon, the god of the chaotic sea, is also the god of the boundary, the line where the water meets the land, and where passion meets law. Let us leave the dry rock of Athens and flow inland, to the river Enipeus in Thessaly. Here begins one of the most romantic and consequential tales of Poseidon's seductions, the story of Tyro. Tyro was a mortal princess, daughter of Salmoneus. She was in love, not with a god, but with a river. She loved the river god Enipeus. Homer tells us she would wander the banks of the river day after day, pouring out her heart to the swirling waters. But Enipeus was cold. He did not return her love. Poseidon saw this. He saw the beautiful woman weeping by the water's edge. He did not take her by force, as he did with Medusa or Amymone. He used a stratagem of transformation. He assumed the likeness of Enipeus. Imagine the scene. Tyro stands by the river mouth where it meets the sea. Suddenly, a wave rises, not a wave of gray seawater, but a wave of the river, purple and dark and majestic. It forms an arch, a hollow vault of water that stands like a mountain around them, hiding them from mortal eyes. Within this liquid chamber, Poseidon, wearing the face of the river she loved, came to her. It was only afterward that he revealed his true nature. He took her hand and spoke to her. "Be happy, woman, in this love, for as the year goes by, you shall bear glorious children. For the embraces of the immortals are not fruitless." He commanded her to keep their secret and dove back into the surging sea. From this union were born twins, Peleus and Neleus. Their story is one of abandonment and discovery, a common motif. Tyro, fearing the wrath of her father Salmoneus, exposed the infants in a field. A herd of horses passed by, Poseidon's sacred animals watching over his kin. A mare kicked one of the infants, leaving a dark bruise on his face. The horse herders found them and named the bruised one Peleus, the dark one, and the other Neleus. These two sons of Poseidon would become kings of immense power. Neleus founded Pylos, the sandy Pylos we visited with Telemachus in the Odyssey, and became the father of Nestor. Peleus became the king of Iolcus, the man who would later send Jason on the quest for the Golden Fleece. Thus, the great saga of the Argonauts is, at its root, a story driven by the bloodline of Poseidon. Speaking of the Golden Fleece, we must speak of the ram itself. The golden ram was not merely a magical animal. It was a cousin to these heroes. Its origin story leads us to another of Poseidon's transformations, this time on the island of Crissa. There was a woman named Theophane, a granddaughter of Helios, famous for her beauty. Suitors swarmed around her like flies. Poseidon, wishing to have her for himself, abducted her and carried her to the island of Cremissa. But the suitors followed, sailing across the sea in pursuit. To hide her, Poseidon displayed his mastery over biological form. He transformed the inhabitants of the island into cattle and sheep. He transformed Theophany into a beautiful ewe, and he transformed himself into a ram. When the suitors landed, they found no woman, only animals. They began to slaughter the sheep for food. Poseidon, seeing his subjects eaten, turned the suitors into wolves. Then, in the form of the ram, he mated with the ewe Theophany. The offspring of this woolly union was the golden ram, the ram with the fleece of gold, capable of flight and speech. This is the ram that would later save Phrixus and Hell, and whose fleece would become the ultimate object of desire for the Argonauts. Once again, Poseidon is the father of the quest, the origin point of the magical objects that drive Greek mythology. We shift our gaze now from birth to death, and to the rocks of Gyrae. The Trojan War has ended. and the Greeks are sailing home. Among them is Ajax the Lesser, the Locrian Ajax. He was a man of violence, who had dragged the priestess Cassandra from the statue of Athena during the sack of Troy, earning the goddess's eternal hatred. Athena sent a storm to scatter the Greek fleet, but Poseidon, surprisingly, saved Ajax initially. He washed the hero up onto the sheer cliffs of Gyrae. Ajax sat there, shivering, soaking wet, but alive. He had survived the wrath of Athena and the fury of the sea, but Ajax was foolish. He was filled with hubris. He stood on the rock and shouted into the wind, "I have escaped the deep in spite of the gods." He claimed that his own strength, not divine mercy, had saved him. Poseidon heard this boast. The Earthshaker does not tolerate arrogance, especially from those he has just spared. He rose from the waves, his trident in hand. He did not speak. He simply struck the rock of Gyrae. The cliff split in two. One half remained standing. The other half, the fragment on which Ajax sat, crumbled and fell into the boiling sea. So there he died, Homer tells us, when he had drunk the salt water. It is a chilling image, the god physically breaking the land to swallow the man. It serves as a grim counterpoint to the saving of the Phaeacians, or Aeneas. Poseidon gives, and Poseidon takes away. Let us cleanse our palate of this salt water with a story of affection and patronage. We speak of Pelops, the hero for whom the Peloponnese is named. Pindar, in his first Olympian ode, tells us a version of the myth that differs from the gruesome tale of Tantalus cooking his son. In Pindar's version, Pelops was not cooked. He was simply beautiful. Poseidon saw him at a feast and fell in love with him, much as Zeus fell for Ganymede. Poseidon seized the boy and carried him up to the highest home of Zeus on his golden chariot. There, Pelops served as the cupbearer to the sea god. When Pelops eventually had to return to the mortal world to win the hand of Hippodamia, he went down to the gray sea alone in the darkness. He called out to his former lover, the heavy-sounding god, "Poseidon, if the loving gifts of Cyprian Aphrodite result in any gratitude, restrain the bronze spear of Oenomaus, and send me on the swiftest chariot to Elis, and bring me to victory." Poseidon heard him. He did not ignore the prayer of his beloved. He gave Pelops a golden chariot and horses with untiring wings. With these divine gifts, Pelops defeated the deadly king Oenomaus in the race and won his bride. This story highlights a softer, protective side of Poseidon, a god who remembers affection and empowers those he loves with the tools of speed and victory. But Poseidon's gifts can also be curses, as seen in the story of the Aleuads, Otus and Ephialtes. These were his sons by Iphimedea. They grew at an unnatural rate. Every year they grew a cubit in breadth and a fathom in height. By the time they were 9 years old, they were giants, 9 cubits wide and 9 fathoms tall. Confident in the blood of their father, they declared war on Olympus. They threatened to pile Mount Ossa on Olympus and Mount Pelion on Ossa to build a staircase to the sky. They threatened to bridge the sea with mountains and make the land into sea. They were turning the world upside down, a chaotic inversion that mirrors Poseidon's own nature as the Earthshaker. They even dared to demand Hera and Artemis as wives. Artemis destroyed them through trickery, running between them as a deer, causing them to shoot each other. But it is notable that Poseidon, usually so protective of his offspring, like Polyphemus, could not save them from their own colossal ambition. They represent the destructive potential of the sea's power when it is unchecked by wisdom. There is one final aspect of Poseidon's extended family we must touch upon: his role as the creator of the horse in a more competitive context. We know of the contest for Athens, but in Thessaly there is a myth that Poseidon created the first horse, Skiphus, by striking a rock. From this rock the first horse leaped forth, an omen of war. This connects Poseidon deeply to the geography of Thessaly, a land of wide plains famous for its cavalry. It is said that Poseidon struck the mountains of Thessaly to create the Vale of Tempe, allowing the Peneus River to drain into the sea. Here, the earth shaker is the landscape maker, the geological force that carves the drainage basins of the ancient world. Before Apollo held Delphi, it is said that the oracle belonged to Gaia and then to Poseidon. Poseidon spoke through the water and the tremors of the earth. Eventually, he exchanged Delphi with Apollo for the island of Caloria. This trade symbolizes the shift from the chthonic, rumbling prophecy of the earth shaker to the clear, enlightened prophecy of the sun god. Yet, even in Apollo's temple, the altar of Poseidon remained, a reminder that the foundation of the earth must be respected before the wisdom of the sky can be received. The genealogy of the sea is a net that catches everything, from golden rams to winged horses, from petrified ships to dry riverbeds. Poseidon's influence is woven into the very DNA of Greek mythology. He is the ancestor of the boldest sailors and the fiercest monsters. He is the god who demands that we respect the depths, both in the ocean and in ourselves. The horizon is gray. The sky is heavy with clouds that look like bruises. On the beach, the black ships of the Aegeans are drawn up in rows, their timbers drying and cracking in the sun. The air smells of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, metallic tang of bronze, and beneath it all, the relentless rhythm of the Aegean Sea, lapping against the shore, whispering to the men who will die today. We return to the walls of Troy, but this time we do not look at the mortals, Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon. We look to the mountains and to the sea, where the true war is being fought. Zeus, the king of gods, had turned his shining eyes away from the battlefield, confident that no other immortal would dare interfere with his decrees. He looked north, towards the Thracian horsemen. But the lord of the Earthshaker kept no blind watch. Poseidon sat high atop the topmost wooded pinnacle of Samothrace, the island of thunders. From this dizzying height, the entire Troad was spread out before him like a map. He saw Mount Ida, he saw the city of Priam, and he saw the Greek ships being driven back to the sea. The sight of the Achaeans' suffering stirred a deep, volcanic anger in his chest. Remember, these were the men fighting against the city of Laomedon, the king who had cheated Poseidon. To see the Trojans winning was an insult to his labor. He pitied the Greeks, and his resentment toward Zeus burned hot. He stood up. The mountain peak itself groaned under his weight. He began his descent. Homer describes this journey with a sense of scale that defies human comprehension. Poseidon did not walk. He strode. With 3 strides he crossed the horizon. With the 4th stride he reached Aegean, his underwater sanctuary. Imagine the speed, the blur of the landscape, and then the silence of the palace. There he did not rest. He went to his stables. He harnessed his bronze-hoofed horses, clothed in gold, with manes that flowed like rivers of molten metal. He put on his own golden armor, which flashed like a lighthouse beam in the murky depths. He took his whip, a finely wrought piece of gold, and mounted his chariot. When Poseidon drives to war, the ocean ceases to be a barrier. The waves parted before him. The creatures of the deep, the whales, the dolphins, the monsters that have no names, rose from their lairs to gambol around him. They recognized their king. The sea was glad. The bronze axle of his chariot flew so fast it remained dry, untouched by the foam. He arrived at the Trojan shore, parking his chariot in a deep underwater cave between Tenedos and Imbros. He hobbled his horses with golden tethers that could not be broken, fed them ambrosial food, and then subtlety. The earth shaker, who can crack continents, chose to enter the battle as a whisper. He emerged from the surf not as a titan, but in the likeness of a man, Calchas, the seer. His voice was not thunder, but the urgent, raspy voice of a prophet. He found the two Ajaxes, great Ajax and little Ajax, who were holding the line, exhausted and desperate. Poseidon, disguised as Calchas, tapped them with his staff. It was a simple gesture, but the effect was miraculous. Homer tells us that he filled them with strong courage. He made their limbs light, their feet, their hands above. They felt a sudden surge of power, like a second wind, but supernatural. Little Ajax, perceptive and sharp, realized it first. He saw the seer walk away, and he noticed the movement of his feet and knees. They were too smooth, too powerful for a mortal old man. "That was no Calchas," Ajax whispered. "That was a god of Olympus." Poseidon then moved through the ranks, rousing the other commanders: Teucer, Leitus, Peneleos, Deipyrus. His words were like salt in a wound, stinging but awakening. He shamed them. "Shame, Argives, mere striplings. I trusted in your fighting to save our ships, but now, here are the Trojans at the ships, men who before were like panic-stricken deer." He blamed the incompetence of Agamemnon, but he demanded that the men fight regardless, even if the king is to blame. It is not for us to be slack in war. As the battle raged, Poseidon's influence grew less subtle. When Agamemnon, Odysseus, and Diomedes were wounded and considering retreat, Poseidon appeared again, this time as an old man, grasping Agamemnon's hand. He reassured the High King that the blessed gods did not hate him entirely, and then he dropped the disguise of the whisper. He ran forward across the plain and let out a war cry. It was a sound that defied physics. It was as loud as 9,000 men, or 10,000, cry in battle when they join the strife of the war god. Imagine that sound. Not a roar of a beast, but the collective scream of an entire army compressed into a single throat. It put strength into the heart of every Achaean. It banished fear. It was the roar of the tsunami hitting the cliff. But Zeus woke up. On Mount Ida, the king of gods saw what was happening. He saw the Trojans fleeing, Hector vomiting blood from a stone throw, and Poseidon leading the rout. Zeus was furious. He sent Iris, the rainbow messenger, with a stern command. She flew to Poseidon and delivered the ultimatum: cease from war and battle. Go to the gods or go to the sacred sea. If you do not obey, Zeus threatens to come here himself and fight you. This is one of the most defining moments of Poseidon's existence. A lesser god, Apollo, Hermes, even Ares, would have bowed immediately. But Poseidon is the brother of Zeus. He is the elder, in some reckonings, or the equal. He swelled with indignation. His response is a masterpiece of divine constitutional law. "Outrageous!" Poseidon bellowed. "Strong as he is, he has spoken too arrogantly. For we are 3 brothers. All was divided in 3 ways. I am not his subordinate. Let him give orders to his own children, to Athena and Apollo, who have to obey him." He refused to leave. He stood his ground on the bloody sand, trident in hand, ready to fight Zeus himself. It took the diplomatic skill of Iris to talk him down. She reminded him of the Furies, the spirits of vengeance who always side with the elder brother, a nod to Zeus's authority as king. Poseidon, grumbling like a receding storm, finally agreed. "I will yield, though in anger," he said. But he left a threat. If Zeus spared Troy in the end, if he did not allow the city to be sacked, then there shall be a breach between us that cannot be healed. He plunged into the sea, and the Achaeans missed him immediately. But the war was not over. In Book 20, Zeus lifts the ban. He unleashes the gods. "Go," he tells them. "Fight for whichever side you please." This is the Titanomachy, the battle of the gods. And here, Poseidon shows the terrifying extent of his power as the Enosikthon. As the gods descended, Hera, Athena, Poseidon, Hermes, Hephaestus for the Greeks, Ares, Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite for the Trojans, the world began to come apart. Zeus thundered from above, but from below, Poseidon shook the boundless earth and the steep crests of the mountains. The text tells us that all the feet of Ida with her many springs were shaken, and her crests, and the city of Troy, and the ships of the Achaeans. The shaking was so violent that deep underground, in the realm of the dead, Hades leaped from his throne. The king of shadows shrieked in terror, fearing that Poseidon would crack the earth open and reveal the dank, moldering houses of the dead to the light of the sun, a sight hateful even to the gods. This is Poseidon's power. He can terrify death itself. In this chaos, Poseidon found himself facing Apollo. It was uncle versus nephew, sea versus sun. Poseidon spoke first. He did not attack. He challenged Apollo with memory. "Foolish boy," he said, "have you no memory? Do you not remember when we two, alone of the gods, worked for Laomedon here in Troy? I built the wall, you herded the cattle, and when the time for wages came, he threatened to cut off our ears." Poseidon taunted Apollo for fighting on behalf of the descendants of such a wicked man. He invited Apollo to fight, but Apollo, the god of reason and distance, refused. "Earth-shaker," Apollo replied. "You would say I was not sane if I fought you for the sake of wretched mortals, who are like leaves." Apollo turned away. It was a victory for Poseidon, not of arms, but of gravitas. And yet, amidst this divine brawling, we see Poseidon's strange sense of fairness again. We revisit the rescue of Aeneas. Aeneas, the Trojan prince, dared to face Achilles. He was doomed. Poseidon saw this. Even though he hated Troy, he turned to the other gods, even to Hera, the arch-enemy of Troy, and said, "I have grief for Aeneas. Why should he suffer for the woes of others? He has always given gifts to the gods." Hera told him to do as he pleased. So Poseidon moved. He strode through the thick of the battle, through the flying spears. He came to where Aeneas and Achilles stood. He poured a mist over the eyes of Achilles, a magical blindness. Then he grabbed Aeneas. With a single heave of his divine arm, he hurled the Trojan prince into the air. Aeneas flew over the ranks of men, over the chariots, landing far at the edge of the battlefield. Poseidon appeared beside him and gave him stern advice. "Do not fight Achilles. He is stronger than you and dearer to the gods. But when Achilles dies, then you may fight in the front ranks." It is a moment of mentorship from the enemy god. Poseidon saved the lineage that would eventually found Rome, simply because it was right and decreed by fate. Later, when the river god Xanthus, Scamander, rose up to drown Achilles, angry at the bodies clogging his waters, it was Poseidon and Athena who intervened. Xanthus was a formidable power, a rushing flood of mud and corpses. Poseidon and Athena stood by Achilles, grasping his hands, pledging their support. While Hephaestus would eventually boil the river with fire, Poseidon offered the structural support, the assurance that the waters would not claim the hero before his time. Finally, we must speak of the wall. The Greeks had built a wall to protect their ships, a wall built without proper sacrifice to the gods. Poseidon hated this wall. It stood on his shoreline, an affront to his authority. While the war raged, he let it stand. But legend tells us, and Homer foreshadows in Book 12, that after the city fell and the Greeks sailed away, Poseidon cleaned the slate. He leagued with Apollo. He turned the mouths of all the rivers that flow from Ida, the Rhesus, the Heptaporus, the Granicus, the Aesopus. He directed all their rushing waters against the Greek wall. Zeus rained continuously from the sky, and Poseidon himself, trident in hand, led the water. He washed away the foundations of logs and stones. He smoothed the sand, making the beach pristine again, as if the Great War had never happened. This is the ultimate legacy of Poseidon in the Trojan War. He is the force of nature that erases the works of man. He builds the walls of cities, Troy, and he washes away the walls of invaders, the Greek camp. He is the great leveler, but the sea is wide, and Troy is but one shore. Before the Trojan War, there was another voyage, one that tested the Sea King's dominion in a different way. We speak of the Argo. While we touched upon the Golden Ram and Euphemus in previous chapters, the geography of the Argonautic expedition is a tour of Poseidon's more exotic and dangerous domains. The Black Sea, the Pontus Euxinus, was a terrifying expanse for early Greek sailors. It was known as the Inhospitable Sea before it was tamed. At its entrance stood the Symplegades, the clashing rocks. These were two massive cliffs that floated on the water, driven by the wind, smashing together to crush anything that tried to pass between them. While Athena helped guide the ship, the existence of such rocks is a testament to the chaotic geology of Poseidon's realm. They are the crushing teeth of the sea. When the Argo passed through, with the help of a dove and Athena's shove, the rocks were fixed in place forever. The sea was tamed. On their return journey, the Argonauts found themselves stranded in the Libyan desert, carrying their ship. They were lost, dying of thirst. They came to the garden of the Hesperides. But salvation came from the sea god's lineage again. They met Triton, the son of Poseidon. Triton appeared not as a monster, but as a helpful god. He lifted a clod of earth and gave it to Euphemus, as mentioned before, but he also physically guided the ship. He took hold of the Argo's keel and pulled it through the shallow waters of the Tritonian lake back to the open sea. He pointed the way. Here, Poseidon's son acts as the ultimate pilot, the benevolent side of the deep that wants the sailors to return home, so that they may tell the tales of the sea's wonder. And let us not forget the very reason for the golden fleece. The ram was the offspring of Poseidon, as a ram, and theophany. The quest that defined a generation of heroes was essentially a quest to retrieve a relic of the sea god's romantic escapade. The fleece, glowing like the sun but born of the sea, represents the union of elements that Poseidon so often embodies. We have seen the god of the sea as a general, a destroyer of walls, a savior of princes, and the silent force behind the greatest quests. He is complex, capable of drowning a man for a boast, yet saving a man for his piety. He shakes the earth to terrify the dead, yet smooths the sand to erase the scars of war. The sun sets on the battlefield of Troy, and the waves wash away the walls. But the night is long, and in the darkness, the senses are heightened. We leave the open, sun-drenched Aegean now. We travel inland to the deep, shadowed valleys of Arcadia, and then south to the ancient, labyrinthine island of Crete. Here, Poseidon is not the shining hero saving Aeneas. Here, he is the primal force, the rumble in the bedrock, the whisper in the dark cave. Let us walk first to the mountains of Phigalia in southwestern Arcadia. It is a place of limestone caves and ancient oaks, far from the sound of the surf. Yet Poseidon is here. He is worshipped here, not as the lord of the sea, but in connections to the earth's deepest grief. We revisit the tale of Demeter, but now we descend into the mystery cult itself, the cult of the Black Demeter. We spoke before of the chase, the stallion pursuing the mare, but the aftermath of that violation birthed a religion of profound darkness. After Poseidon forced himself upon Demeter in the form of a horse, the goddess retreated into a cave on Mount Ilion. She clothed herself in black. She withdrew her power from the world, much as she did when Persephone was taken. The crops failed, the earth withered. The people of Phigalia remembered this. In the deep recess of their sacred cave, they set up a statue that would terrify the uninitiated. Pausanias, the traveler, describes it with trembling precision. It was a woman, seated on a rock, but she had the head of a horse. Serpents grew from her head like a mane. In one hand she held a dolphin, in the other a dove. This is the union of Poseidon and Demeter made manifest, the sea and the earth, the beast and the bird, fused in a grotesque, divine harmony. From this union, as we whispered before, came the mistress, Despoina. Her true name is forbidden. To speak it is to invite the attention of powers best left sleeping. She is the goddess of the mysteries, honored alongside her mother. In the sanctuary of Lycosura, the oldest city in the world according to the Arcadians, Poseidon is honored as the father, but he is a distant, brooding father. The statues there showed him leaning, watching, his power dormant but present in the damp soil. But if Poseidon's lust creates monsters and mysteries, his anger creates voids. We must speak of the lost city of Helike. This is not a myth lost in the mists of the Bronze Age like Atlantis. This was a historical tragedy that shook the Greek world to its core in the winter of 373 BC. Helike was a wealthy city on the coast of Achaea. It was the sanctuary of Poseidon Heliconios, the lord of Helike. It held a holy grove and a magnificent temple. But the people of Helike committed a grave sin. Some say they defiled the sanctuary by dragging suppliants from the altar and killing them. Others say they refused to give the statue of the god to the Ionian colonists who asked for it. They denied the god's own children their heritage. Poseidon does not send a letter of warning. He sends nature. 5 days before the catastrophe, the earth began to whisper. The animals heard it first. Aegean tells us that immense columns of vermin, rats, snakes, weasels, beetles, centipedes, suddenly fled the city. They poured out of the gates, heading for the mountains. The people watched them go, puzzled, but they stayed. They stayed in their stone houses, confident in their walls. Then came the night. It was winter. The air was cold. Suddenly, a vertical jolt struck the city. This was the Enocycthon striking the table. The ground did not just shake, it subsided. The entire city dropped. And as the buildings crumbled, the sea rushed in. It was not a wave that receded. The land itself sank beneath the water level. In a single night, Helike and every living soul within it, men, women, children, cattle, vanished. When the sun rose, there was no city. There was only a new bay. The tops of the trees in the sacred grove of Poseidon could be seen waving just beneath the surface of the water, like drowning hands. For centuries, travelers would sail over the spot. They could look down through the clear water and see the statue of Poseidon, still standing in his submerged temple, holding a hippocampus in his hand. It became a ghostly tourist attraction, a somber reminder that the Earthshaker can reclaim the land whenever he chooses. This is the origin of the fear of the bull from the sea, the sound of the earthquake that precedes the flood. This image of the bull brings us to Crete, to the palace of Knossos, to the story of King Minos. This is a story of political ambition, divine favor, and a punishment so psychological, so intimate, that it destroys a family from the inside out. Minos was not yet king. He was contending for the throne against his brothers. He needed a sign of divine right. So he went to the shore and built an altar to Poseidon. He prayed, "Lord Poseidon, send me a bull from the depths of the sea, that I may sacrifice it to you and prove my right to rule." Poseidon heard. The water began to churn, foaming white, and from the surf emerged a creature of breathtaking beauty, a bull, but not an ordinary bull. It was snow white, massive and perfect in every proportion. It shook the water from its flanks and walked calmly to the altar. The people of Crete fell to their knees. The sign was undeniable. Minos was king. But here, hubris enters the heart of Minos. He looked at the bull. It was too beautiful. It was a masterpiece of nature. To kill such a creature seemed a waste. Minos thought he could trick the god. He took the snow-white bull and hid it among his own herds. In its place, he dragged an ordinary bull to the altar and slit its throat. "Do not try to cheat the gods," especially not the god of the deep, who sees all hidden things. Poseidon saw the switch. He was not insulted by the quality of the meat. He was insulted by the disobedience. But notice his punishment. He did not strike Minos with lightning. He did not send an earthquake to topple Knossos. He decided to destroy Minos' dignity. Poseidon turned his gaze to Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae. She was a daughter of the sun, Helios, radiant and proud. Poseidon laid a curse upon her. He inflamed her heart with an unnatural, consuming lust. Not for a man, not for a god, but for the bull. The very bull Minos had refused to sacrifice. The torment of Pasiphae is a tragedy of the grotesque. She burned with desire for the animal. She could not sleep. She could not eat. Finally, desperate, she went to the master craftsman, Daedalus. "Help me," she pleaded. "Hide my shame, but fulfill my need." Daedalus, bound by his service to the royal family, constructed a hollow wooden cow. He covered it with the hide of a real cow, so convincing that it fooled the beast. He wheeled it into the meadow where Poseidon's bull grazed. Pasiphae climbed inside the wooden shell, waiting in the darkness. The bull came. The union was consummated. From this horrific act, engineered by the wrath of Poseidon, a child was born. He had the body of a man, but the head of a bull. He was Asterion, but the world knows him as the Minotaur. Poseidon's revenge was complete. Minos, the king who tried to keep the beautiful bull for himself, was now the stepfather of a monster. He had to build a labyrinth to hide his shame, a maze of stone to contain the living proof of his impiety. The Minotaur is the ultimate symbol of Poseidon's ability to twist nature when his will is flouted. It is the wild, untamable sea erupting into the ordered life of the palace. And what of the snakes? We must briefly return to Troy to witness one final act of chthonic horror orchestrated by Poseidon, or Athena, depending on the version. But the creatures are of the sea. The priest Laocoon warned the Trojans against the wooden horse. "I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts," he cried. He hurled a spear at the horse's side. The sound echoed hollowly, but the gods would not let the secret be revealed. From the sea, from the direction of Tenedos, where Poseidon had parked his chariot, two twin serpents appeared, Phorcys and Cherubia. Their crests were blood-red, towering above the waves. They slithered onto the shore. They went straight for Laocoon and his two young sons. They wrapped around them in coils of crushing muscle. Laocoon struggled, bellowing like a wounded bull at the altar, a grim callback to the sacrifices of Poseidon. The serpents crushed the life out of them, and then slithered up to the citadel to hide beneath the shield of Athena. While Virgil attributes this to Athena's protection of the fraud, the snakes coming from the sea suggests the collaboration of the Sea King. It was Poseidon silencing the one voice of truth that could have saved the city he hated. It is the sea reaching out to strangle the land's last hope. This darker side of Poseidon is why he is often worshipped with titles that suggest stability, pleading with him not to act. He is Poseidon Asphalios, the securer. We pray to him to lock the earth in place, to keep the foundations firm. The temple at Sunyon, standing on the edge of the cliff, is an architectural prayer. Please, hold this rock up. Do not let it slide into the abyss. Even the geography of Greece bears the scars of his moods. The Vale of Tempe in Thessaly, as we touched upon, was created when he struck the mountains to drain the lake that covered the plain. He is the landscape architect of catastrophe. He creates fertile plains by draining swamps, but he also creates swamps by flooding plains. We leave Crete now, with the bellowing of the Minotaur echoing in the labyrinth. We leave the sunken ruins of Helica, where the fish swim through the temple colonnades. We have seen the god who breaks the earth and breaks the mind. The sea is never still. Even when the surface is glass calm, the currents beneath are shifting, twisting, changing the shape of the seabed. Poseidon is the god of this fluidity. We have seen him break walls and drown cities, but he also possesses a stranger power, the power to alter the very form of living things. As we move away from the grand wars of Troy and the tragedies of Crete, we find ourselves walking along the quieter shores of Thessaly and Messenia, where the Sea King grants wishes that defy nature itself. Let us walk on the sands of Thessaly. Here, a maiden named Cronus was once strolling by the tide. She was renowned for her beauty, a prize sought by many suitors, but Cronus wanted no husband. She walked alone, enjoying the solitude of the empty beach. But solitude is rarely granted when the Lord of the Deep is watching. Poseidon saw her, and as is the dark rhythm of these ancient tales, he took her. But afterwards, amidst the crashing of the waves, a strange moment of negotiation occurred. Poseidon, perhaps feeling a rare pang of regret, or simply in a mood of generosity, offered to grant her any wish. "Ask for what you will," the god promised. Cronus did not ask for gold, or a kingdom, or the love of a hero. She looked at the god with eyes hard as flint. "My wish," she said, "is to never suffer such a violation again. Take away my womanhood. Make me a man, a warrior, invulnerable." Poseidon granted it. The voice of Cronus deepened, becoming the rumble of a baritone. Her soft skin hardened. Her form shifted, broadened, muscled. She became he. Cronus became Caeneus, and Poseidon added a gift of his own. He made Caeneus invulnerable to bronze and iron. No sword could cut him, no spear could pierce him. Caeneus lived a life of legendary violence, becoming one of the greatest warriors of the Lapiths. He was present at the famous wedding of Pirithous, where the centaurs, drunk on wine, attacked the guests. The centaurs tried to kill Caeneus. They struck him with spears, but the weapons bounced off his skin like hail off a stone roof. Frustrated, the centaurs realized they could not cut him, so they buried him. They piled immense trunks of pine and oak, trees sacred to Poseidon, upon him. They hammered him into the earth with the weight of the forest. Some say he was crushed. Others say that from the pile of wood a bird with golden wings flew out, a flamingo, perhaps, or a phoenix. Even in this strange end, the touch of Poseidon's transforming power remained. From the transformation of the body, we move to the transformation of the self. We travel to sandy Pylos, the kingdom of Neleus, the son of Poseidon, whom we met in Part 5. Neleus had 12 sons. The eldest was Periclymenus. Triton appeared not as a monster, but as a helpful god. He lifted a clod of earth and gave it to Euphemus, as mentioned before. But he also physically guided the ship. He took hold of the Argo's keel and pulled it through the shallow waters of the Tritonian lake back to the open sea. He pointed the way. Here, Poseidon's son acts as the ultimate pilot, the benevolent side of the deep that wants the sailors to return home so that they may tell the tales of the sea's wonder. And let us not forget the very reason for the golden fleece. The ram was the offspring of Poseidon, as a ram, and theophany. The quest that defined a generation of heroes was essentially a quest to retrieve a relic of the sea god's romantic escapade. The fleece, glowing like the sun but born of the sea, represents the union of elements that Poseidon so often embodies. We have seen the god of the sea as a general, a destroyer of walls, a savior of princes, and the silent force behind the greatest quests. He is complex, capable of drowning a man for a boast, yet saving a man for his piety. He shakes the earth to terrify the dead, yet smooths the sand to erase the scars of war. The sun sets on the battlefield of Troy, and the waves wash away the walls. But the night is long, and in the darkness the senses are heightened. We leave the open, sun-drenched Aegean now. We travel inland to the deep, shadowed valleys of Arcadia, and then south to the ancient, labyrinthine island of Crete. Here, Poseidon is not the shining hero saving Aeneas. Here, he is the primal force, the rumble in the bedrock, the whisper in the dark cave. Let us walk first to the mountains of Phigalia in southwestern Arcadia. It is a place of limestone caves and ancient oaks, far from the sound of the surf. Yet, Poseidon is here. He is worshipped here, not as the Lord of the Sea, but in connection to the earth's deepest grief. We revisit the tale of Demeter, but now we descend into the mystery cult itself, the cult of the Black Demeter. We spoke before of the chase, the stallion pursuing the mare, but the aftermath of that violation birthed a religion of profound darkness. After Poseidon forced himself upon Demeter in the form of a horse, the goddess retreated into a cave on Mount Elaean. She clothed herself in black. She withdrew her power from the world, much as she did when Persephone was taken. The crops failed. The earth withered. The people of Phigalia remembered this. In the deep recess of their sacred cave, they set up a statue that would terrify the uninitiated. Pausanias, the traveler, describes it with trembling precision. It was a woman, seated on a rock, but she had the head of a horse. Serpents grew from her head like a mane. In one hand she held a dolphin, in the other a dove. This is the union of Poseidon and Demeter made manifest. The sea and the earth, the beast and the bird, fused in a grotesque, divine harmony. From this union, as we whispered before, came the mistress, Despoina. Her true name is forbidden. To speak it is to invite the attention of powers best left sleeping. She is the goddess of the mysteries, honored alongside her mother. In the sanctuary of Lycosura, the oldest city in the world according to the Arcadians, Poseidon is honored as the father, but he is a distant, brooding father. The statues there showed him leaning, watching, his power dormant but present in the damp soil. But if Poseidon's lust creates monsters and mysteries, his anger creates voids. We must speak of the lost city of Helica. This is not a myth lost in the mists of the Bronze Age like Atlantis. This was a historical tragedy that shook the Greek world to its core in the winter of 373 BC. Helica was a wealthy city on the coast of Achaea. It was the sanctuary of Poseidon Heliconios, the lord of Helica. It held a holy grove and a magnificent temple. But the people of Helica committed a grave sin. Some say they defiled the sanctuary by dragging suppliants from the altar and killing them. Others say they refused to give the statue of the god to the Ionian colonists who asked for it. They denied the god's own children their heritage. Poseidon does not send a letter of warning. He sends nature. 5 days before the catastrophe, the earth began to whisper. The animals heard it first. Aegean tells us that immense columns of vermin, rats, snakes, weasels, beetles, centipedes, suddenly fled the city. They poured out of the gates, heading for the mountains. The people watched them go, puzzled, but they stayed. They stayed in their stone houses, confident in their walls. Then came the night. It was winter. The air was cold. Suddenly, a vertical jolt struck the city. This was the Enocycthon striking the table. The ground did not just shake, it subsided. The entire city dropped, and as the buildings crumbled, the sea rushed in. It was not a wave that receded. The land itself sank beneath the water level. In a single night, Helica and every living soul within it, men, women, children, cattle, vanished. When the sun rose, there was no city. There was only a new bay. The tops of the trees in the sacred grove of Poseidon could be seen waving just beneath the surface of the water, like drowning hands. For centuries, travelers would sail over the spot. They could look down through the clear water and see the statue of Poseidon, still standing in his submerged temple, holding a hippocampus in his hand. It became a ghostly tourist attraction, a somber reminder that the Earthshaker can reclaim the land whenever he chooses. This is the origin of the fear of the bull from the sea, the sound of the earthquake that precedes the flood. This image of the bull brings us to Crete, to the palace of Knossos, to the story of King Minos. This is a story of political ambition, divine favor, and a punishment so psychological, so intimate, that it destroys a family from the inside out. Minos was not yet king. He was contending for the throne against his brothers. He needed a sign of divine right, so he went to the shore and built an altar to Poseidon. He prayed, "Lord Poseidon, send me a bull from the depths of the sea, that I may sacrifice it to you and prove my right to rule." Poseidon heard. The water began to churn, foaming white, and from the surf emerged a creature of breathtaking beauty, a bull, but not an ordinary bull. It was snow white, massive and perfect in every proportion. It shook the water from its flanks and walked calmly to the altar. The people of Crete fell to their knees. The sign was undeniable. Minos was king. But here, hubris enters the heart of Minos. He looked at the bull. It was too beautiful. It was a masterpiece of nature. To kill such a creature seemed a waste. Minos thought he could trick the god. He took the snow-white bull and hid it among his own herds. In its place, he dragged an ordinary bull to the altar and slit its throat. Do not try to cheat the gods, especially not the god of the deep who sees all hidden things. Poseidon saw the switch. He was not insulted by the quality of the meat. He was insulted by the disobedience. But notice his punishment. He did not strike Minos with lightning. He did not send an earthquake to topple Knossos. He decided to destroy Minos' dignity. Poseidon turned his gaze to Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae. She was a daughter of the sun, Helios, radiant and proud. Poseidon laid a curse upon her. He inflamed her heart with an unnatural, consuming lust, not for a man, not for a god, but for the bull. The very bull Minos had refused to sacrifice. The torment of Pasiphae is a tragedy of the grotesque. She burned with desire for the animal. She could not sleep. She could not eat. Finally, desperate, she went to the master craftsman Daedalus. "Help me," she pleaded. "Hide my shame, but fulfill my need." Daedalus, bound by his service to the royal family, constructed a hollow wooden cow. He covered it with the hide of a real cow, so convincing that it fooled the beast. He wheeled it into the meadow, where Poseidon's bull grazed. Pasiphae climbed inside the wooden shell, waiting in the darkness. The bull came. The union was consummated. From this horrific act, engineered by the wrath of Poseidon, a child was born. He had the body of a man, but the head of a bull. He was Asterion, but the world knows him as the Minotaur. Poseidon's revenge was complete. Minos, the king who tried to keep the beautiful bull for himself, was now the stepfather of a monster. He had to build a labyrinth to hide his shame, a maze of stone to contain the living proof of his impiety. The Minotaur is the ultimate symbol of Poseidon's ability to twist nature when his will is flouted. It is the wild, untamable sea erupting into the ordered life of the palace. And what of the snakes? We must briefly return to Troy to witness one final act of chthonic horror, orchestrated by Poseidon, or Athena, depending on the version. But the creatures are of the sea. The priest Laocoon warned the Trojans against the wooden horse. "I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts," he cried. He hurled a spear at the horse's side. The sound echoed hollowly, but the gods would not let the secret be revealed. From the sea, from the direction of Tenedos, where Poseidon had parked his chariot, 2 twin serpents appeared, Phorcys and Chereboia. Their crests were blood-red, towering above the waves. They slithered onto the shore. They went straight for Laocoon and his 2 young sons. They wrapped around them in coils of crushing muscle. Laocoon struggled, bellowing like a wounded bull at the altar, a grim callback to the sacrifices of Poseidon. The serpents crushed the life out of them, and then slithered up to the citadel to hide beneath the shield of Athena. While Virgil attributes this to Athena's protection of the fraud, the snakes coming from the sea suggests the collaboration of the Sea King. It was Poseidon silencing the one voice of truth that could have saved the city he hated. It is the sea reaching out to strangle the land's last hope. This darker side of Poseidon is why he is often worshipped with titles that suggest stability, pleading with him not to act. He is Poseidon, Asphalios, the securer. We pray to him to lock the earth in place, to keep the foundations firm. The temple at Sunia, standing on the edge of the cliff, is an architectural prayer. Please, hold this rock up. Do not let it slide into the abyss. Even the geography of Greece bears the scars of his moods. The Vale of Tempe in Thessaly, as we touched upon, was created when he struck the mountains to drain the lake that covered the plain. He is the landscape architect of catastrophe. He creates fertile plains by draining swamps, but he also creates swamps by flooding plains. We leave Crete now, with the bellowing of the Minotaur echoing in the labyrinth. We leave the sunken ruins of Helica, where the fish swim through the temple colonnades. We have seen the god who breaks the earth and breaks the mind. The sea is never still. Even when the surface is glass calm, the currents beneath are shifting, twisting, changing the shape of the seabed. Poseidon is the god of this fluidity. We have seen him break walls and drown cities, but he also possesses a stranger power, the power to alter the very form of living things. As we move away from the grand wars of Troy and the tragedies of Crete, we find ourselves walking along the quieter shores of Thessaly and Messenia, where the Sea King grants wishes that defy nature itself. Let us walk on the sands of Thessaly. Here, a maiden named Cronus was once strolling by the tide. She was renowned for her beauty, a prize sought by many suitors. But Cronus wanted no husband. She walked alone, enjoying the solitude of the empty beach. But solitude is rarely granted when the Lord of the Deep is watching. Poseidon saw her, and as is the dark rhythm of these ancient tales, he took her. But afterwards, amidst the crashing of the waves, a strange moment of negotiation occurred. Poseidon, perhaps feeling a rare pang of regret or simply in a mood of generosity, offered to grant her any wish. "Ask for what you will," the god promised. Cronus did not ask for gold or a kingdom or the love of a hero. She looked at the god with eyes hard as flint. "My wish," she said, "is to never suffer such a violation again. Take away my womanhood. Make me a man, a warrior, invulnerable." Poseidon granted it. The voice of Cronus deepened, becoming the rumble of a baritone. Her soft skin hardened. Her form shifted, broadened, muscled. She became he. Cronus became Cronus. And Poseidon added a gift of his own. He made Cronus invulnerable to bronze and iron. No sword could cut him, no spear could pierce him. Cronus lived a life of legendary violence, becoming one of the greatest warriors of the Lapiths. He was present at the famous wedding of Pirithous, where the centaurs, drunk on wine, attacked the guests. The centaurs tried to kill Cronus. They struck him with spears, but the weapons bounced off his skin like hail off a stone roof. Frustrated, the centaurs realized they could not cut him, so they buried him. They piled immense trunks of pine and oak, trees sacred to Poseidon, upon him. They hammered him into the earth with the weight of the forest. Some say he was crushed. Others say that from the pile of wood, a bird with golden wings flew out. A flamingo, perhaps, or a phoenix. Even in this strange end, the touch of Poseidon's transforming power remained. From the transformation of the body, we move to the transformation of the self. We travel to sandy Pylos, the kingdom of Neleus, the son of Poseidon whom we met in Part 5. Neleus had 12 sons. The eldest was Periclymenus,